I understand.
That was my wristwatch. Let me share my screen. Okay, we're going to do some prayers, and then we'll do a little bit of meditation to set our motivation. So as we've done the last couple of weeks, we'll recite once in English, and then the refuge in bodhicitta, and then twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. Through the collections I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. Sangye Churang Suki Chognam La Jangju Badu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sognam Ki Drola Pencher Sangye Drupa Sho Sangye Churang Suki Chognam La Jangju Badu Dagni Kapsuchi Dagi Chunyen Gipe Sognam Ki Drola Pencher Sangye Drupa Sho. I asked Yangtze Rinpoche once, did he prefer to say, I go for refuge or I take refuge? And he said, oh, I go for refuge. As you can see in Tibetan, we say Jiangchu Bardu Dagni Kapsu Chi. Chi is the honorific for the word to go rather than take. So it's kind of like you're proceeding somewhere rather than taking. So now the short mandala, which is a condensation of all of the methods of accumulating merit and purification. Sajipoki Juxing Meto Tramri Rablingji Nide Genpadi Zange Shindu Mikte Ulwargi Drukunam Dakshingla Chupashu. So that connection, even if you don't make a mudra, you don't have a mandala set, you can imagine your whole environment, the whole world, the whole universe transformed with your pure view into a Buddha land, offering that to our gurus, the omniscient mind. And then the succeeding verse. Shanka, can you move up a little bit? There we go. Jesun Lama Dampa Kenam Ki Chukukala Kense Chuzinte Jita Sampe Uje Zimala Sabge Chuki Chapa Abdu So Idam Guru Radna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Thank you. So good to see you again. We're going to spend a couple minutes in meditation. Hello to those who just joined: Jennifer, Paul, Tel, Palmo, Donnie, Naz, and Mel, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So sit comfortably. I was mentioning to someone recently something that I mention each time: relax your body, relax your mind. Remind yourself you don't have to think about anything else. That itself can set the tone. Your body's erect, comfortable. Watch your breathing, your respiration. Once you found it, hold it in mindfulness to the exclusion of everything else. with the wisdom factor, recognizing when you're breathing in, when you're breathing out. Then if you had some success in calming the mind a little, getting rid of the continuity of thoughts, place your attention on your mental consciousness instead of the breathing. Take that as your object of mindfulness and analyze to try to get a mental image of the conventional clear light nature of your mind, the space-like clear light nature of your mind, and not something that you see with your eyes. It doesn't have a visual imagery, but like space, it's just the lack of any obstruction of the mental consciousness to the arising of thoughts, and those present thoughts reabsorbing back into the consciousness. Even if you think you get an image of that, try to recognize that is just an approximation that is appearing within the actual clear light nature of your mind. Let go of that and try to sense something more subtle. When a thought appears within that, or if your mind strays to your body, presence of your body, or the sense of an ego or something, recognize that as an obstacle and let go of that, refocusing your mind on the clear light nature, like a vast space. This is an inner resource we always have. The fact that we can become better, that we are not inferior in any ultimate way. We can get rid of all of our faults. We have infinite potential to develop every quality. There is no living being, no sentient being who does not have this developmental Buddha nature. And that can create great joy and optimism when everything else looks like it's crumbling in our lives. We always have this Buddha nature, conventional Buddha nature. The fact that we can recognize it now is due to the fact that we have at this moment a life of leisure and endowment. The Buddha called an auspicious moment in the great continuity of rebirths from beginningless time. Rarely have we had such auspicious moments. Being born not only as a human, free of the lower realms or the long life God realms, but the presence of the teachings that were taught by the Buddha, still in a living tradition, being of sound body and mind, having faith, or at least hope in the teachings, and a community of like-minded aspirants, practitioners, and patrons. We have everything we need to practice the Dharma, rather than using it as we have done numberless times in the past as a human, even when we didn't have a life of leisure and endowment, these freedoms. Rather than using it to accumulate wealth for ourselves or power, to be comforted by many, many friends, to retaliate against enemies, we can use this life of leisure and endowment, as the Buddha suggested, to achieve the high goals of liberation or enlightenment. Liberation for ourselves, but the Buddha advised those who are intelligent to recognize that if we seek liberation for ourselves, our own nirvana, we will be leaving behind numberless beings, all of whom have been depthlessly kind to us in past lives, who are struggling within cyclic existence without a refuge protector, without a teacher, without a guide. Oh, they have ordinary teachers, they have ordinary worldly guides, giving seminars how to be successful, how to invest in the stock market, how to become a real estate magnate. But they have no refuge protector to protect them from the sufferings of cyclic existence. We are exactly equal with them, all living beings, from the lowest hell being to the spirits, to the animal realm, the insects, the large beasts. Everyone has been our mother as a human numberless times, and as animals, protected us, educated us, given us pleasures. While they are suffering in cyclic existence without any firm guidance how to navigate how to escape from cyclic existence, it would be unconscionable for us to leave them to their plight. Of course, we can help in certain things now. We can give advice, worldly advice. We can give even Dharma advice. But until we reach a state of deep realization, we can't really lead them without error. In order to do that, we must become ourselves a Buddha. Only a Buddha can faultlessly, spontaneously, effortlessly lead sentient beings out of suffering into that same state. So for the sake of sentient beings, I must become a Buddha to lead them, to protect them, to set them into the state of omniscience themselves. To do so, I need a collection of merit and a collection of wisdom, principal causes of the form, body, and the Dharmakaya, the two bodies of the Buddha, if you divide into two. An optimal way to do that is by studying the teachings, listening to the discourse on emptiness that Lama Khapa composed, the illumination of the intent. So for the sake of all sentient beings, I'm going to listen, participate, contemplate the teachings today, meditate on them when the occasion arises. Meditate here means once we've got a clear insight into some factor, just hold that single-pointedly. For the sake of achieving Buddhahood, for the sake of all sentient beings. I'm going to participate in the teachings in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. And then bring your attention back to the present. Oh, good to see you. Or to know your presence in the case of some tabs that are without faces. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Tal. Good to see you all. So before we begin, any questions? Let's say any observations about our meditation at the beginning? Is everyone following along? You think it's a waste of time? Oh, yeah, that's good. Any questions about the meditation? Okay. Any questions from last classes? Anything that's been bugging you? Richard's looking at his list of questions. Is that, Richard, do you have something?
No, Venerable. I'm just finding my page for
Oh, okay.
today.
Yeah. So I should say in Jimpa's book, page 96, if I'm not mistaken, and in Jeffrey Hopkins' text, Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism, page 169. Okay. So, okay, David's got Compassion in Tibetan Buddhism there. No questions? We all set? Paul, anything? No? Okay. You caught up? Okay. So where I ended last time was the paragraph just before a quotation that says, when presenting how the absence of intrinsic existence of phenomena is taught in the Hinayana scriptures. The precious garland says, that's where we ended last time. But just to give a little recap of the previous important section, we on the just a couple of paragraphs before that, I'm not sure if it's on a previous page or the same page, it says, also in a sutra taught to the Shravakas to help eliminate their afflictive obstructions, conditioned things are analyzed as lacking intrinsic existence by means of 5 similes. Do you remember that? This is from a sutra called the Lump of Foam Sutra, if we translate it into English. Form is like a mass of foam. I was going to say foam is like a mass of form. Form is like a mass of foam. Feelings are like water bubbles. Perceptions are like mirages. Mental formations are like plantain trees. And consciousness is like an illusion. Thus taught Surya Mitra, Thupten Jinpa translates. And you may be aware that I synthesized from the translation of this sutra by Bhikkhu Bodhi in a Wisdom Publications book, Collected Discourses, I think it's called. What is it called? I don't have it here. Of the Samyutta Nikaya. And this particular section is, I wanted to read a little bit about that, even though you may have downloaded that, or if you haven't downloaded that, if you didn't see that, I wanted to emphasize a few things. So this, here, Lama Tsongkhapa just quotes this one verse, which is kind of like, it comes at the end of a discourse that Buddha Shakyamuni gave. And I'm going to read a little bit of that. So from this translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi, on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Ayodhya, which is the Pali name for Ayodhya. Has anyone been to Ayodhya in India? You travelers, you have? Okay. Ayodhya is one of the locations near Shravasti, where the Buddha spent. We've talked about Shravasti on other occasions, where the Buddha spent a lot of time, but he spent many rainy seasons also in Ayodhya, on the bank of the river Ganges. Ayodhya has been famous in recent years because the nationalist Hindu party in India spearheaded an effort to destroy a previous Muslim shrine there called, what's it called? Babri Masjid, you've probably heard, which caused thousands of deaths. And, Snehi, are you familiar with that from India? So that's in Ayodhya. But before that, that was built, that temple, that Muslim temple, was built on a Hindu shrine that existed before, commemorating the birth of Rama in the Hindu pantheon. So that's a lot of things happened in Ayodhya, or Ayodhya as in the Pali. So on one occasion, the Blessed One, the Buddha, was dwelling at Ayodhya on the bank of the river Ganges. There the Blessed One, the Bhagavan, addressed the bhikkhus thus. Bhikkhus, suppose that this river Ganges, because it's right on the banks of the river, right, was carrying along a great lump of foam. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of foam there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? So that was, I think I even read that last time. That's kind of like the longer explanation the Buddha gave for the line that's quoted in Thupten Jinpa's translation that Lama Tsongkhapa quotes, "Form is like a lump of foam." I wanted to read one other slightly longer point. And in the notes on that Bhikkhu Bodhi made on this section, this sutta, the lump of foam sutra, that includes all of these, not just foam, but also the analogy about feeling like water bubbles and perceptions like mirages and so forth. In notes to that, Bhikkhu Bodhi said, one evening when dwelling in that abode in Ayodhya, the Blessed One, the Bhagawan, came out from his fragrant cottage and sat down by the bank of the Ganges. He saw a great lump of foam coming downstream and thought, I will give a Dhamma talk, sort of Pali, right? Instead of saying Dharma, Dhamma, relating to the five aggregates. Then he addressed the bhikkhus sitting around him. So that comment in the notes comes from the commentary by Buddha Ghosha, famous, commentator of the Theravada tradition, who wrote a commentary on this whole Samyukta Nikaya, this big volume of collected discourses of the Buddha. And at that point, Bhikkhu Bodhi made this comment, which I think I mentioned in our discussion group on last Monday. So you're all welcome to come on Monday. We have a discussion for an hour and 15 minutes or so. Bhikkhu Bodhi said, this sutra is one of the most radical discourses on the empty nature of conditioned phenomena. Its imagery, especially the similes of the mirage and the magical illusion, has been taken up by later Buddhist thinkers most persistently by the Madhyamikas, Some of the images are found elsewhere in the Pali Canon. In the context of early Buddhist thought, these similes have to be handled with care, he says. So he's talking from the Theravada point of view. He's warning the readers not to take it extreme way that the Madhyamakas take, right? In our case, the Prasangikas. They are not intended to suggest an illusionist view of the world, but to show that our conceptions of the world and our own existence are largely distorted by the process of cognition. Just as the mirage and the magical illusion are based on real existence. So here's what I mentioned before, that one can read this from the Mahayana point of view and see that the Buddha was alluding to non-true existence, the lack of inherent existence, or you can take the stance that Bhikkhu Bodhi is taking here. Where did I get? Show that they are not intended to suggest an illusionist view of the world, but to show that our conceptions of the world and our own existence are largely distorted, just as the mirage and magical illusion are based on real existence, he says. So Mahayana, Mahayana in general, and the Prasanghika in particular, would say, no, they're not based on real existence. Like one of the questions earlier about the analogy that was given by the Buddha in a sutra about a magician creating a magical illusion of an attractive being, and someone in the audience feels, lust as a result of that. and meditates on the impermanence of this illusory, beautiful person, their suffering nature and so forth, the Buddha said that's wrong because that doesn't exist. It's not a real existence. So here, Bhikkhu Bodhi is saying, just as the mirage and the magical illusion are based on real existence. So he's going counter to that. The sand of the desert, the magician's appurtenances. It's a word that I don't usually use. It means accessories, the things that are necessary. So these false conceptions arise from a base that objectively exists, namely the five aggregates. So I just wanted to mention that because in the Theravada tradition today, as they read this, they don't take it in the way that Lama Tsongkhapa and Nagarjuna and others have taken it. So I'm going to read one other paragraph here. Suppose, bhikkhus, that in the last month of the hot season, so we're talking about the course, the Lamp of the Path course in Nepal being in September, I think someone said, so that, at the last month of the hot season, at high noon, a shimmering mirage appears. A man with good sight would inspect it, ponder it, and carefully investigate it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a mirage? So too, bhikkhus, whatever kind of perception there is, whether past, future, or present, internal or external, gross or subtle, inferior or superior, far or near, a bhikkhu inspects it, ponders it, and carefully investigates it, and it would appear to him to be void, hollow, insubstantial. For what substance could there be in perception? Okay, I skipped the one on feeling, but anyway. So the reason I've read this to you, it was just to emphasize that this one stanza that Lama Tsongkhapa quotes here comes in the context of explanation of the Buddha, talking about each of those, can we say similes? Form is like a massive foam, feelings are like water bubbles, perceptions are like mirages, mental formations are like plantain trees, and consciousness is like an illusion. Thus taught Surya Mitra. Thupten Jinpa translates. Actually, the actual polytext in the Sanskrit, if it does exist, doesn't call him Surya Mitra, which literally Thupten Jinpa retranslated into Sanskrit from Tibetan. Nime Nien, I think in Tibetan, it's actually Aditya Bandhu. Aditya is another Sanskrit word, maybe from the Vedic literature and the Vedas and so forth, that means son. And Bandhu means friend, like Vasubandhu, the famous Sanskrit author that we've talked about many times. So it would be nice to let him know somewhere that it's not Surya Mitra, it's actually Aditya Bandhu. Anyway, that's for your edification. So we talked about that. And then Lama Tsongkhapa said, commentary on the awakening mind, which some of you have received teachings on, the Dalai Lama taught recently by Nagarjuna, draws a distinction stating that the Buddha taught Shravakas the five aggregates, while he taught bodhisattvas how forms and so on resemble the five similes, such as a massive foam. The reference there is to those Shravakas who, for the time being, remain unable to realize suchness. It is not meant to include all Shravakas. For in the same text, that means in the commentary on bodhicitta by Nagarjuna, it says, those who do not understand emptiness are not receptive vehicles for liberation. Such ignorant beings will revolve in the prison of existence of the 6 classes of beings. Okay, so that was leading up to where we start today. So today, when presenting how the absence of intrinsic existence, lack of true existence, emptiness, and so forth, it's taught in the Hinayana scriptures. That's the supposition here. That's the presentation that it is taught in the Hinayana scriptures about emptiness, but in this way that even present scholars, present practitioners of the Theravada, like Bhikkhu Bodhi, they claim it's not there. So this quotation from the Precious Garland, in the great vehicle, the Mahayana, non-origination is taught. And in the other, that means the Hinayana vehicle, the other vehicle from the Mahayana, exhaustion is taught, namely emptiness. Since cessation and non-arising are the same, concede that the Mahayana scripture is authentic. So what's it saying here? Jeffrey Hopkins translates it a little bit differently. He says, the absence of production taught in the Mahayana, because Jimpa translates non-origination. So if you say, what does non-origination mean? There are, in Tibetan, it says kewa mepa, so the non-existence of production. So as I've mentioned before, in Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, at the very beginning, the first proof of emptiness is that phenomena are not inherently produced. That refers just to impermanent phenomena, right? Because permanent phenomena are not produced. They don't have causes and conditions. But so this term, non-origination, Thupten Jinpa translates it as, Jeffrey says, the absence of production or non-production. Sometimes you see in other scriptures the same term translated as unborn. Phenomena are unborn. Have you ever heard that terminology? Like in I think the Sakya tradition and the Kargi tradition, they think mind is unborn. What is that talking about? It means it's not inherently produced. So the absence of production taught in the Mahayana, Jeffrey Hopkins translates, and the extinction, Jimpa translates it as exhaustion, of the others are in fact the same emptiness. Since they indicate the non-existence of inherently existent production and the extinction of inherent existence, therefore let the Mahayana be allowed as the Buddha's words. Jimpa translated as, what did he say? Concede that the Mahayana scripture is authentic. The Tibetan word is su, which is usually means patient. So in other words, be patient, forbear the Mahayana. Don't say that the Mahayana is not authentic. So this is another one of those verses that is meant by Nagarjuna to establish the Mahayana as the Buddha's word, Tekchen Kadup, we talked about before. So Lama Tsongkhapa continues. Here, Nagarjuna states that in the Mahayana Sutras, non-origination through intrinsic nature, or you could say the lack of the non-existence of inherently existent production, Jeffrey translates it, non-origination through intrinsic nature, is taught to be emptiness, right? That's what when we talk about emptiness, that's what it means, the lack of inherently existent production. While the other, that means the Hinayana Sutras, teach emptiness, they teach while when the other teach emptiness, they teach exhaustion or extinguishment. Jeffrey translates this word sepa as extinguish, of conditioned things. So what does that mean? So when in some of the Hinayana sutras, they talk about phenomena being exhausted or being extinct. Say, for instance, when we talk about nirvana, remember we talked about this context before, nirvana with remainder and without remainder, right? George Michael, have you heard of nirvana with remainder and without remainder?
I have, but I'm not recalling exactly the distinction between the two.
Right. And so, and then beside the distinction, what's the connection with here? So for instance, when we talk about in our tenets classes, when we talked about the Hinayana tenets of the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantika schools, so the main theoretical basis for the Hinayana explanations, they talked about an arhat, Hinayana arhat would achieve their nirvana, first of all, in human form, in their last lifetime, when they have not yet achieved nirvana, they have a human body was thrown by their previous contaminated karma, flesh and blood, right? And then when they sit down and they finally eliminate the last obstructions to liberation in their meditative equipoise and selflessness, they would achieve nirvana. That is the fact that they will no longer take rebirth within cyclic existence due to the force of their past karma, an uncontrolled rebirth within cyclic existence. So when they arose from that, they still have a human body, and they would walk around, and they would still have some experiences that might be uncomfortable, like the story of Mahamoggallana, one of the Buddha's disciples, being beaten by some of the Hindus who he seemed to have, that they took him to have insulted their teacher, but their minds would have no suffering. So they had passed beyond suffering. They had reached nirvana, and then when they died, and the mind no longer, that contaminated mind, this is according to a Hinayana point of view, no longer exists at the time of death, at the very moment of death when the mind is snuffed out, according to Hinayana, they would have a nirvana without remainder, meaning without a remainder of the contaminated aggregates, because they no longer would be associated with the body they previously had. So that would be an exhaustion. That would be without remainder of the contaminated aggregates. So they would have exhausted or caused an extinction of their contaminated aggregates. Okay. So the criticism the Mahayana would say is that in that case, who achieved that nirvana without remainder? Because there's no longer a sentient being, according to you, Hinayana, right? Make sense? A moment ago, there was a person with the remainder of the contaminated aggregates. You could impute that person on those aggregates. The next, in the succeeding moments, when they go through the death process and they die, and they're no longer associated with those contaminated aggregates, there's no longer a person, according to those Hinayana tenets. So that nirvana without remainder is not something which is possessed by anyone, because there's no one existing at that time. Okay, let me continue. So here Nagarjuna states that in the Mahayana Sutras, non-origination through intrinsic nature is taught to be emptiness, while when the Hinayana Sutras teach emptiness, they teach the exhaustion of conditioned things. Since the reference of these two presentations of emptiness are the same, they're both talking about emptiness. So the implication here is that when the Hinayana is talking about nirvana without remainder, when they say that the aggregates are exhausted, they mean that the aggregates are not inherently existing, not inherently existent. Nagarjuna is saying one need not be intolerant or impatient or dismissive of the teachings of emptiness of the Mahayana Sutras, because the same thing is taught in the Hinayana Sutras. Okay, so maybe not clear yet. Maybe in the succeeding paragraphs becomes clear. How are you doing? You may, at least on the verbal level, understanding what's being said? Anna, are you okay? She's concentrating. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. On the matter of how the reference of these two presentations are identical, some explain this as follows. If the followers of the Shravaka schools, talking the Hinayana schools, right, were to accept exhaustion with respect to conditioned things, given that exhaustion is not possible if things possess intrinsic existence, then one who accepts exhaustion must also accept right from the start the absence of intrinsic existence. So let me read the same paragraph in Jeffrey Hopkins' translation. Hearers assert an extinguishment of products. That is the extinguishment of the aggregates when one achieves nirvana without remainder, right? So they no longer have those aggregates. Hearers assert an extinguishment of products, but if products inherently existed, then that would not be feasible. Where is it? Then, therefore, these two are actually going back to Jimpa's translation. If the followers of the Shravaka schools were to accept exhaustion with respect to conditioned things, given that exhaustion is not possible if things possess intrinsic existence, then one who accepts exhaustion must also accept right from the start the absence of intrinsic existence. Therefore, these two are in actual fact identical. This interpretation is totally incorrect. For one could apply the same argument to the Madhyamaka, since intrinsic existence is impossible if it exists. Whatever phenomena such as sprouts and so on that the Madhyamakas accept will have to be accepted right from the start as empty of intrinsic existence. This could bring the absurd consequence that all phenomena, such as sprouts, would be identical to emptiness. Jimpa puts an exclamation mark. Similarly, the statement in the Precious Garland commentary that there is no actual difference whatsoever between non-origination and momentariness also betrays the misunderstanding of the text's meaning. So what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying here, he's refuting some misinterpretations of that verse from the Precious Garland. So here, in a Hinayana Sutra cited in the commentary on the 60 stanzas of reasoning. So what is that commentary? That's a commentary by Chandrakirti, right? Nagarjuna wrote the 60 stanzas of reasoning, one of his great treatises. Chandrakirti wrote a commentary to that. Remember, we talked about several commentaries Chandrakirti wrote the Prasanapada word commentary to the fundamental wisdom. He wrote the Madhyamaka Vatara Bhasha, the auto commentary to, which is the meaning commentary to fundamental wisdom. He wrote a commentary to Arya Deva's 400 stanzas. This is what Chandrakirti wrote. And he also wrote a famous commentary to the 60 stanzas of reasoning that Nagarjuna wrote. So there in Chandrakirti's commentary to the 60 stanzas, it says, that which is the total elimination of this suffering, a definite elimination, a purification, an exhaustion or extinction, freedom from attachment, a cessation well pacified, a dissolution where no additional suffering is led to. What he's talking about, nirvana, right? That which is a total elimination of this suffering. So when you're talking about nirvana with remainder, you're talking about still having the body. That which is a total elimination of this suffering, of the suffering aggregates, a definite elimination, a purification, an exhaustion, a freedom from attachment, a cessation well pacified, a dissolution where no additional suffering is led to. This non-origination and non-arising is peace. This is excellence. It is thus. For this is the definite elimination of all the aggregates. It is the extinction of existence. It is freedom from attachment. It is cessation, and it is the transcendence of sorrow. Or in other words, you can say, when you say transcendence of sorrow, you can say nirvana. So in explaining the meaning of this citation, so let me go back. So this is a, I said this is a statement by Chandrakirti. I should have said this is his commentary on this statement, which is found in his commentary in the 60 stanzas. So in the 60 stanzas, in his commentary, it quotes this Hinayana Sutra, okay, that we just read. So in explaining the meaning of this citation from Hinayana Sutra, Chandrakirti says, given the usage of the demonstrative this, the statement from total elimination up to dissolution is made from the point of view of our present suffering or aggregates alone. From total elimination up to dissolution. So if you look at the quotation, it says that which is the total elimination of this suffering, a definite elimination, purification, and exhaustion, of freedom from attachment, a cessation, well pacified, a dissolution. So that section is made from the point of view of our present suffering or aggregates alone. So it's talking about nirvana with remainder. Present suffering, so the present suffering of the Hinayana Arhat. While from no additional suffering is led to, that's the next phrase in that sentence, up to the end where it says up to transcendence of sorrow, the achievement of nirvana, is made from the perspective of our future suffering. What would our future suffering be once we achieved nirvana without remainder? There would be no additional suffering is led to this non-origination, non-arising is peace. No suffering is led to after that. This is excellence. The thought might occur to some that this suffering or aggregate here refers to the afflictions which are specific examples, he says, instantiations of these two factors, suffering and aggregates. So a genetic aggregate is being used here to refer to a particular. This explanation is incorrect. So let me read what Jeffrey says here. So some say, in what way do these two teachings have the same meaning about these two words, non-origination and exhaustion? In which way do these have the same meaning? Some say hearers assert an extinguishment of products, but if products inherently existed, then that would not be feasible. Therefore, when an extinguishment of products is asserted, it is necessary to assert non-inherent existence from the beginning. Oh no, I'm reading the wrong section. He said this is very wrong. If that were so, then a sprout or any other phenomena which the Madhyamikas assert to exist would have that reason, and therefore it would absurdly follow that sprouts, as well as all other products in emptiness, would be synonymous. So Jeffrey says in the commentary in the Precious Garland by Ajita Mitra, it says that there is no difference in meaning at all between non-production and momentariness. In Jhumpa's translation, he didn't mention that particular commentary. Maybe in his note he does. In Ajita Mitra's commentary on the Precious Garland, it says that there is no difference in meaning at all between non-production and momentariness. That's absurd. You know, non-production has a particular meaning. Momentary means impermanent, right? They're not the same thing. However, this is the explanation of one who has not understood the meaning of the text. Okay, so this is where Jeffrey's translating. A Hinayana Sutra, quoted in Chandrakirti's commentary on the 60 stanzas. This is what we're talking about here. Jeffrey puts in parentheses, a Hinayana Sutra set forth by Shariputra after actualizing nirvana. So this sutra is not one that we have in the Mahayana canon. It's something apparently that Shariputra gave discourse on after he achieved nirvana. Says, complete abandonment of these sufferings, definite abandonment, purification, extinguishment free from desire, cessation, thorough pacification, disappearance, non-connection to other suffering, non-arising and non-production. This is peace. This is auspicious. It is like this. This is a quotation from the sutra, right? Like Tayata. The definite abandonment of all the aggregates, the extinction of cyclic existence, freedom from desire, cessation, and nirvana. Definite abandonment of the aggregates. Sounds like nirvana without remainder, right? Commenting on this, Chandrakirti says that because the phrase these sufferings uses the term of proximity, these, Jhumpa says demonstrative this. Demonstrative pronouns also, that is also a demonstrative pronoun, so that's not correct. The Tibetan text actually has this word closeness. It is like this where did I just see here? This is peace. This is also, it is like this. Commenting on this, Chandrakirti says that because the phrase "these sufferings" uses the term of proximity, these or this, as opposed to that. Okay, so proximity means the demonstrative pronoun that's talking about something that's close to you, right? This suffering, the suffering of this lifetime, these sufferings, so this suffering, that because it uses that particular demonstrative pronoun of closeness, complete abandonment of all these sufferings leading up to disappearance refers only to the sufferings of the aggregates that exist presently in one's own continuum. The passage non-connection to other sufferings, all the way up to the word nirvana or transcendence of sorrow, refers to future sufferings. Since this sutra, and then in parentheses, Jeffrey has this explanatory paragraph or sentence. Since this sutra clearly refers to the extinguishment of present suffering or the present mental and physical aggregates, it does not refer to an extinguishment brought about by the path, but by the natural extinguishment, the extinguishment which is their nature, which these phenomena have always had, and which is seen in meditative equipoise. So this Hinayana scripture, which is talking about, this word extinguishment or exhaustion, when it's talking about the present aggregates, it can't be talking about the aggregates being exhausted by the path so that you no longer have them, that they are extinguished, because you still have them. It's talking about using the word extinguishment or exhaustion in the sense that from the very beginning, phenomena have been extinct from or have not had any inherent existence from the very beginning. That's their very nature. How are we doing? Paul, are you following? Okay, you're following. Jennifer, are you following?
Somewhat.
Somewhat, okay. So the terminology that's being used is a little bit complicated, but basically it's talking about this. The fact that in the Hinayana Sutras, when they use the word exhaustion, as in nirvana without remainder, right? That the sufferings have been exhausted, right? That the aggregates have been exhausted or have become extinct. That's not the correct meaning, because the Hinayana says that one does still have aggregates after that. One has a very subtle form aggregate, but mainly one has the mental aggregates. So one's aggregates have not been exhausted. One has not become extinct. One has not become non-existent. That the being has not snuffed out in nirvana without remainder. When they talk about exhaustion, they're using here, when we refer to it to the present, it's not talking about your present aggregates don't exist, because they do exist. You know that, even in the Hinayana. It's talking about the fact that they are from the very beginning, since beginningless time, never had any intrinsic or inherent existence. That inherent existence was primordially exhausted, never existed from the beginning.
So Venerable?
Yes, yes.
Um,
Chanka.
Yeah, so
I didn't have to see your face. I recognize your voice. Yeah.
we are old friends. So anyway, so then is it accurate from your commentary, from your verbal, everything you said, is it accurate to say that that section that goes from total elimination to dissolution is referring to nirvana with remainder, and the section after that refers to nirvana without remainder, according to the Hinayana, of course?
Yeah, I think, well, that's it's not stated explicitly here, but that's it can be applied to that case. Okay, it's not stated in that Hinayana citation that this is referring to nirvana with remainder and without remainder, but
Yes.
that can be implied by that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So then Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary continues. The thought might occur to some, or in Jeffrey's translation, he says, objection. This is like someone objecting, or someone's thinking this, that this suffering or aggregate, or these sufferings or aggregates here refers to the afflictions, which are specific instantiations of these two factors, particular instances of these two factors, suffering and aggregates. So a generic aggregate is being used here to refer to a particular. This explanation too is incorrect. So Jeffrey's translation is this: sufferings and aggregates, these two terms, because when we talked in the quotation, it talked about that which is the total elimination of this suffering, a definite elimination, a purification and exhaustion. So, and then later it says, for this is the definite elimination of all the aggregates. So we're talking about two things: suffering and aggregates not existing, right? Suffering and aggregates are general terms, someone thinks, used here for their instances, the afflictions. So what are the afflictions? The afflictions are klesha, right? The causes of suffering, the karma and klesha. So the afflictions are sufferings. They're the causes of sufferings, but they are also suffering. And the afflictions are they found in the aggregates? Stephen, are the klesha found in the aggregates? Where are they found? Which aggregate?
Compositional factors, Venerable George.
Right. They're not consciousness. They're not, when we talk about consciousness, we mean primary consciousness. They're not form, they're not feeling, they're not discrimination, and they're not primary consciousness. So the only place that's left is compositional factors, which includes all of the mental factors, including the klesha. So sufferings and aggregates are general terms, someone thinks, here used for their instances, the afflictions. When you talk about generality, has particular instances of it, right? Form is a generality. We can talk about my body, the body of the car, or let's say the form of the car, and so forth. Those are instances of the generality form, right? So this person says, sufferings and aggregates are general terms used here for their instances, the afflictions. Therefore, this sutra does not refer to an extinction of the aggregates in general. He's thinking that it's referring to the extinguishment of the kleshas. And Jimpa ended his translation of that section saying this explanation is incorrect. Jeffrey translates, this is also not feasible. If the general terms are not amenable to explanation with a general meaning, they must be explained as referring to their instances. Here, however, this can be explained in the context of a generality. Otherwise, according to the proponents of true existence, a passage such as, and this is a quotation from the Uttara Tantra, the afflictions are primordially extinguished. Okay, so you might have been wondering when I said primordial extinction refers to emptiness. You might have said, where does that come? That we find that kind of terminology in the Uttara Tantra Mahayana Sutra, right? The afflictions are primordially extinguished. So the sentence says, otherwise, according to the proponents of true existence, that means the Hinayana practitioners, right, in general, but also Chittamatra believes in true existence, a passage such as the afflictions are primordially extinguished, found in Maitreya's Sublime Science, or Uttara Tantra, cannot be explained as primordial extinguishment in the sense that the aggregates have been primordially without inherently existent production, which is what it means. It means that they are from time without beginning, primordially, without inherently existent production. No phenomena, aggregates, for instance, no impermanent phenomena has ever had inherently existent production. When they're produced, when they're born, when they're generated, they are generated only conventionally. They're not produced inherently. As we'll see later, and I've alluded to a couple of times, Nagarjuna's famous initial proof of emptiness is proving that phenomena are not inherently produced, because they're not inherently produced from themselves. You know, the sprout is not inherently produced from itself, such that the sprout existed before in the seed. It's not inherently produced from something different than itself, which you might think makes sense because the sprout is produced from the seed, right? It's not inherently different from the seed. Otherwise, they would have no connection whatsoever, no causal connection. Phenomena are not produced from both self and others, and they're not produced without cause. Those are the four alternatives that are usually refuted. Nagarjuna refutes. So it says, if otherwise, according to the proponents of true existence, a passage such as the afflictions are primordially extinguished, which means that they are not inherently produced from the beginning, in Maitreya's Uttara Tantra, cannot be explained as primordial extinguishment in the sense that the aggregates have been primordially without inherently existent production. They must incorrectly explain this as a total abandonment by means of the path. Then when the nirvana that is to be actualized exists, the actualizer would not exist, and thus could not report on the extinguishment that was realized as was done in this sutra. Also, so in other words, the sutra citation is talking about reporting that, what do we say? Shariputra is supposedly the author of this discourse, right? The Hinayana Sutra. So he's talking about, if he's talking about the nirvana that he has right now, the nirvana that Hinayana calls nirvana with remainder, that's feasible. But if he's talking about having achieved the nirvana without remainder in the future, he couldn't talk about that because Shariputra won't exist according to their tenets at that point. When the nirvana that is to be actualized exists, the actualizer would not exist, the nirvana without remainder, and thus could not report on the extinguishment that was realized as was done in the sutra. Also, when the actualizer exists, that means the nirvana with remainder, right? the nirvana to be actualized would not exist because the aggregates have not been extinguished. Thereby, they are unable to explain this sutra. So that's Jeffrey Hopkins' translation. Jimpa translates this way. So when he said this explanation is incorrect. Now, if a generic term cannot be explained in terms of a universal, that is, if an instance cannot be can be explained in terms of a generality, it then needs to be interpreted in terms of a particular. Here, however, the word can be explained in the sense of a generic term. To summarize, according to the Buddhist essentialists, the Hinayana, those who believe in inherent existence, true existence, according to the Buddhist essentialists, since one cannot explain the meaning of the word exhaustion in the manner the sublime continuum says, that the afflictions are primordially exhausted, which is saying, according to the Buddhist essentialists, one cannot explain the meaning of exhaustion that the afflictions are primordially exhausted. That the Uttara Tantra says that they have been without inherently existent production from the beginning. Because according to the essentialists, that means the people who propound true existence, inherent existence, they have had inherently existent production. That you can't say that the afflictions are primordially exhausted in that sense, which is that the aggregates are primordially exhausted because they are primordially devoid of arising through intrinsic nature or inherent nature, inherent existence. One will have to explain exhaustion instead as total elimination through actualizing the path. However, when what is actualized, nirvana, is present, the one who is actualizing it no longer will be existent, will no longer be. And conversely, when the one who is actualizing it is present, the aggregates will not have ceased. And so no nirvana will have been actualized. Thus, one will be unable to explain the meaning of the sutra cited. Wow. There's one emoji that people send sometimes that the brain is coming out, right? Sounds a little bit like that. So this is a bit complicated. This whole section is a bit complicated. Remember, I read from Jose's notes in his translation of Dose of Emptiness that this section is particularly vexing, difficult. But this particular point maybe seems a bit difficult, but if you see it in connection to nirvana with and without remainder, maybe becomes a little more clear. Basically, what it's saying is that when the Hinayana scriptures talk about extinction, like nirvana without remainder, meaning that the aggregates have been exhausted, extinct, no longer exist. That's their take on it, that the person no longer exists. Actually, what the word exhaustion or extinction is referring to is that the phenomena have been without inherent existence from the beginning. So that instead of saying that first you have nirvana with remainder, and then nirvana without remainder, that's the general presentation of the Hinayana, right? First you achieve nirvana with remainder of the aggregates. You've eliminated the sufferings, the kleshas, you're still a human being. And then when you die, there is nirvana without remainder, so that the aggregates have become exhausted or extinct. Instead of that, Mahayana says that first you have a nirvana with remainder, First, you have a nirvana without remainder. That means you have the direct realization of emptiness within the context of the klesha being totally abandoned. So there's no remainder of inherently existent appearances. There's no remainder of the aggregates. There's no remainder of the afflictions. The afflictions are totally abandoned. Then when you arise from that, you have a nirvana with remainder. So you have a nirvana in which there is the appearance of inherent existence again. That's one way of explaining that section. Okay, let me continue on. Nadine, are you okay? You look frustrated. Complicated section, right?
It's complicated, yes, but I find it great. Our understanding will improve now. I have a cold, that's why I look straight.
Oh, you look like you're nirvana without remainder, without the usual Nadine is no longer there. Okay, get well quickly. So let me continue. Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary says, according to us, that means Madhyamaka. However, exhaustion in that sutra is not an exhaustion secured through an application of an antidote. It doesn't mean that like say for instance, you've exhausted the afflictions by applying the antidote of emptiness to them. It's not referring to that. Rather, it can be explained in terms of the statement, it is called exhaustion because it is primordially exhausted. We are able to explain well the meaning of the sutra as referring to a natural or primordial absence of inherent existence and phenomena. A nirvana that is a cessation of suffering in the sense of primordial extinguishment or exhaustion is taught in the sutra, as well as a cessation in the sense of the absence of inherent existent production. So Lama Tsongkhapa says, thus we're able to explain the meaning of this sutra well, from the Madhyamaka point of view. Otherwise, if you try to explain it from the Hinayana point of view, it doesn't hold water, it breaks down logically. In light of the foregoing, Lama Tsongkhapa says, the two things that the noble Nagarjuna spoke of, Arya Nagarjuna spoke of as being the same with respect to their reference are nirvana, that is the cessation of suffering as presented in the Hinayana Sutras on the basis of defining what constitutes exhaustion, and the cessation presented in the Mahayana Sutras in terms of the the absence of intrinsic arising or intrinsic generation or inherently existent production. This is a point that does not appear to have been understood. And you're going to say, yeah, I agree with that. So I have explained it here in some detail. So even the great scholars, both Mahayana and Hinayana, could not explain that citation well. So Lama Tsongkhapa has gone to the effort of explaining it. Or as Jeffrey says, the superior Nagarjuna, Arya Nagarjuna, indicates that these are the same, and because this statement appears not to have been understood, I have explained it here in detail. Okay, so you shouldn't feel like you're deficient because this section seemed like, like that emoji with the brain exploding out, right? go back, think about it. Mainly what it's talking about is that in the Hinayana scriptures, when they talk about exhaustion, they're actually referring to emptiness. That the Buddha, when the Buddha said that, and like say Shariputra's sutra talking about exhaustion, he's actually talking about the fact that the phenomena have been from the very beginning devoid of any intrinsic existence. Okay, that one has realized that. Okay. Now, Snehi has incipient migraine coming. Do you have a question? You're holding your fingers here. No? That's okay. Sean, what do you think?
Is some of the confusion not by the use of the word exhausted? I mean, I think I'm either misunderstanding what they're saying, or because it seems like what's being exhausted is the appearance of inherent existence, because inherent existence never primordially existed in the first place. Is that what they're saying?
I'm not sure what you're saying. Well, so this term exhaustion, to me, the word exhaustion sounds like something that was there. If you translated the Tibetan or Sanskrit word as exhaustion, it sounds like something that was there and then no longer is there. Like the peanut butter was there and now it's the peanut butter is exhausted, you know.
Well, that's why I'm saying it seems like you would have to say the appearance of inherent existence. It appears that it's there, but it's never, like, inherent existence has never existed from primordial.
You could understand it that way. But what I'm thinking is that the way we translate it as exhausted or extinct may not cover all of the meanings of the Sanskrit and Tibetan word. The Tibetan, I can't remember what the Sanskrit is. The Tibetan word is sepa. Usually in certain circumstances that can mean exhausted, that something was there and you've run out of it, right? You know, my money is exhausted, or what do we use that in everyday life? Is there some phrase?
Well, fuel, I mean, you could have fuel that's exhausted.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, exhausted. But here, what the term is referring in these sutras to the fact that something never existed from the beginning, and so it was, let's say, primordially non-existent, rather than saying that it existed at one time and then petered out, you know, became exhausted. Like, you know, you're running and you say, I'm exhausted, I have no more energy left, right?
Yeah, I think that term exhausted is just not a good translation.
Well, no, it's in certain circumstances, that word definitely can be applied as exhausted. Because it can mean that upon application of antidotes, the klesha become exhausted. They were there conventionally, and afterwards they cease. But in certain circumstances, the same word has a slightly different connotation, that it never existed at all. Shanka, you have a thought. Shanka disappeared. Where did he go?
Sorry.
Yeah.
This goes back to the statement, if I understood you correctly, that you made, that the Hinayana believe that you first attain nirvana with remainder,
Right.
and followed, and after you rise from meditative equipoise, you have nirvana without remainder.
No, they don't say that. They say that.
Oh, when you die.
Yeah, when you die, you have
nirvana
without remainder. Yeah.
And so, and then you said, if I understood you correctly, that the Mahayana is the Mahayana, I guess, to say that the first you attain nirvana without remainder, because in
Right.
meditative equipoise, you basically see, you have a direct realize, you are seeing reality as it exists, right? You don't have
Not
the,
only that, but within that state, the klesha have totally been abandoned, because previously you had a direct realization of emptiness when you were in Arya. You had not achieved nirvana then. You've abandoned some of the delusions, but that direct realization of emptiness within the context of having abandoned all the klesha is called nirvana without remainder. That means without remainder of the appearance of true existence.
so, okay, so that
Or
brings
the
up a second,
Madhyamaka. Yeah.
that brings up a second question, which I'll ask after this one is finished. So yeah, so you abandon all the kleshas, and you have a direct realization of emptiness. So you have nirvana without remainder, and
Right.
then when you arise
Right.
from
You're still a human. You haven't died yet.
right, so when you arise from meditative equipoise, you attain nirvana with the remainder, because the remainder here kind of refers to the fact that things still see, even though you know that they don't exist the way they appear, however, they still appear truly, somewhat truly existent.
So they appear completely truly existent.
Completely truly
In fact,
existent,
kind
but
of. It
right.
is exactly that when you arise from that, you have achieved nirvana because you've abandoned all of the klesha, but now it's no longer meditative equipoise on emptiness where there's no appearance of inherent existence at all. All that appears to your mind is emptiness. You have a direct realization of that. Now, when you arise from that, all your senses, let's say using the analogy of the eye, trees, fences, flowers, all appear to be inherently existent again. So you have a remainder of the appearance of true existence. The Prasangika says that's the correct interpretation of what the Buddha meant when he talked about nirvana with and without remainder.
So it's interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go on, go.
So it's interesting. So what the word remainder here then, from the Mahayana perspective, refers to the remainder of the appearance of true existence.
Right.
However, in the Hinayana, the remainder refers to the contaminated aggregates.
Right.
So
Right.
there's like two different.
So they say that if there's exhaustion, if there's no remainder, that means the aggregates no longer exist and the person is snuffed out. That's one of the etymologies of the word nirvana in the Hinayana scriptures. That when you achieve nirvana, first of all, what's snuffed out are the afflictions, and then when the contaminated aggregates are abandoned at the time of death, your whole continuum is snuffed out. The Mahayana in general doesn't accept that, because Chittamatra also accepts that the Hinayana arhats continue to exist, but they have a slightly different interpretation of the other points. But in general, in the Mahayana, especially in the Prasangika, this particular explanation that the referral to extinguishment doesn't refer to the aggregates in general, it's referring to the extinguishment of the appearance of inherent existence, or let's say the extinguishment here means, or exhaustion means, the fact that phenomena have been time without measure, primordially absent of inherent existence.
This brought up, sorry, Snehi, but this brought up while we were talking a second question, as I was mentioning, which is that, so you've eliminated all the kleshas, right?
Right.
So you've eliminated all the afflictions, you've achieved nirvana, but you still haven't eliminated the subtle, the seeds, right? Is that correct?
No. If you have achieved nirvana, you have abandoned the delusions and their seeds.
Oh, I see. So it's not just klesha to me. Am I incorrect in the definition of klesha? I thought was just the
just the manifest delusions. Yeah, so
manifest delusions.
I just use that to say that the kleshas are abandoned. But when you achieve nirvana, when you have a true cessation of any affliction, any klesha, you've also abandoned their seeds. So it's not an abandonment in the sense of simply suppressing them and the seeds are still there, right? When you have a true cessation, that means that they are abandoned from the root. That means that they will never arise again. So there are successive moments of that on the path, from the path of seeing, on the various stages of the path of meditation, on the various bhumis of the bodhisattva path. One has abandoned more and more of the klesha and their seeds. You would say, when we say abandoned here, we mean abandoned from the root. So that's not the casual use of the word abandoned when we talk about mundane vipassana, when the delusions of the desire realm are said to be abandoned only in the sense of being suppressed. So the seeds are still there, not in that casual use of the word abandoned. Here it means abandon in the sense of true cessation, an analytical cessation, so that the klesha and their seeds have ceased to exist.
What about the imprint?
The imprints are something that are called obstructions to omniscience, and those are not abandoned. The Hinayana arhats don't abandon those imprints at all, because when they still have perception, when they're not in meditative equipoise on emptiness, phenomena still appear to them as being inherently existent, and they have other obstructions to omniscience. Hinayana arhats, one of the obstructions to omniscience is the fact that a person might spontaneously act without volition, act in some crazy way, like jump around or, spurt out some nonsense or something like that. Those are said to be, well, there are many other obstructions to omniscience, but those are the prominent ones that the Hinayana arhats sometimes would exhibit. So they had not exhausted the obstructions at all to omniscience. The only way to abandon the obstructions to omniscience is to have a combination of direct realization of emptiness coupled with the supreme method of bodhicitta and accumulation of merit that the bodhisattvas have. The Hinayana arhats do not have bodhicitta, right? If they did have bodhicitta, they wouldn't be striving for their own nirvana. So they're devoid of that. What do I give examples sometime of? Trying to clean something up with a cloth. Maybe you can get off the gross things with the cloth, but if you add some scouring powder, you can get down to the deeper things. So the addition, the cloth is, maybe in this analogy I'm giving, is kind of like the realization of emptiness. It can get rid of the klesha and their seeds, but it can't get rid of the imprints of those. You need to add another factor along with the cloth, the realization of emptiness, to get rid of those imprints. It's not sufficient just to have bodhicitta to eliminate the imprints. Also, you need to have the cloth. You need to have the realization of emptiness. Snehi, what do you think?
Actually, Shankar's question brought this doubt in my mind. So from the Hinayana perspective, when they're talking about nirvana without remainder, and they are saying that when they die, all the aggregates, including the mental consciousness, ceases, right? So then their belief is that consciousness is not eternal, like it just ends.
Right. That not all Hinayana, but the predominant schools. There might be some like the Mahasangikas who say that something continues on. But in general, they say that the word nirvana, they take the etymology to meaning snuffed out, not simply that the klesha and their seeds are snuffed out, but that the aggregates have become extinct or exhausted and they no longer exist. Whereas the Mahayana says that the word exhaustion is actually referring to something else. It's meaning that phenomena have been primordially devoid of any inherent existence. So, so generally in the Hinayana, they say that when one has achieved nirvana or parinirvana, one no longer exists. So of the questions that were asked to the Buddha, there are famous 14 questions at various times, whether in parinirvana, which means the nirvana of a Buddha. Generally, we say, usually nirvana of the arhat is not called parinirvana, but parinirvana means when one has passed away completely. Does the Tathagata exist or not exist? So the implication was that, is there some residue left over? Are there any aggregates existing? And the Buddha didn't answer those questions. There are not only that, but there are other things that were asked, and they're called the 14 unanswered questions of the Buddha. That will come up later in the text. And so some scholars, especially Western scholars, say, oh, that shows the Buddha didn't know everything. It wasn't omniscient. He didn't know these things. Actually, there were questions that were posed by questioners who had an implicit bias in their mind, and no matter what the Buddha said, they were going to misinterpret that. So the Buddha remained mum, didn't answer. So that's kind of good advice sometime when you're asked like political questions. Something is better to keep your mouth shut, because whatever you say is going to be taken incorrectly. Okay.
Because
Does that make sense?
yes, and it's because I was confused about the Hinayana position, because one of the assumptions that I just took for granted is continual rebirth or reincarnation, or just I don't know what that right word is when you become an arhat, but they're actually saying you become an arhat and then you just go out of existence.
That's right. So that poses, like in our attendance class when we talked, maybe last year sometime, about the Hinayana tenets, we brought up that fact that the Mahayana would say that is inconsistent, because if there's no one that has achieved nirvana without remainder, because once there's no remainder, that means there's no consciousness, there's no aggregates, there's no person any longer. So the Mahayana says that's not the case, that consciousness does not cease. There are always a continuity of the aggregates, even in the state of enlightenment. The Buddha has, uncontaminated aggregates. He has a consciousness aggregate and so forth. Okay. How are we doing? Jennifer?
Thank you, Venerable Noble George. I just had a curiosity. So, for instance, the relics of like Shariputra and Madhyamaka, would the Hinayanas think that there is no value to them, because if they're the cremated remains of contaminated aggregates, then what's the point?
Oh no, they value them highly. In fact, in Burma, I would think one of my monastic friends in Singapore went to Burma and or in Thailand also, got relics of Shariputra and Mahamoggallana. I think amongst Lama Sopa Rinpoche's relic collection that goes on the relic tours, there are also relics of Shariputra, Mahamoggallana, maybe some other Hinayana arhats, I don't recall. But they are said to be very sacred in the Hinayana tradition also, not because they're contaminated, but because those individuals, well, say, even if they weren't in Arhat, the relics of highly realized beings are said to have a dependent arising of auspiciousness. You know, for instance, you very kindly, Jennifer, sent me some blessed water from Lourdes, right? So there's some juxtaposition of it's said to be dependent arising, dependent origination, meaning a karma. If you visit Bodh Gaya, if you visit Lourdes, where the little children were said to have seen an apparition of an appearance of the mother of Jesus and so forth, it's said that there's some karmic benefit of visiting those places and having relics from those places. So the relics of beings who have achieved high status on the path are also said to be, to bestow some kind of blessings. The famous Shroud of Turin? Have you heard of the Shroud of Turin, Jennifer? You know, supposedly the shroud that was around Jesus' body when he was interred, considered to be incredibly, if you see it or come in contact or close proximity to it, there's great blessings. The tooth of the Buddha in where is it, in Kandy, that got the right place in Sri Lanka, said to bestow great blessings. So, and also the Buddha's relics, when he passed away, were shared among various various kingdoms, is the right term, I guess, in India, because they bestowed certain blessings and so forth. So that the relics of Shariputra and Mahamoggallana would certainly fall into that category.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the logic of someone who follows a Hinayana tenet, and then why the relics would offer blessings.
Right. So for them, when the Buddha achieved parinirvana, when he passed away, took the aspect of dying, that the Buddha's continuum didn't exist any longer. It was just the great release, no longer there. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said, he said about his own personal view, he said, if that were the case, I don't think I'd want to achieve nirvana if that's what nirvana was, that you were completely snuffed out, that there wouldn't be any presence to help sentient beings any longer after that. So the Mahayana has a different take on that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's worthwhile. Oh, do you have another question, Jennifer? Okay. So it's worthwhile having, so we've gone through this logic, connecting it with nirvana and with remainder, not remainder, and so forth. It's worthwhile going back and reading that section again, like this story I've told so many times about Newton reading the great treatise on mathematics. He had to read it once, didn't understand anything, the second time a little bit. Some things now that we've said will resonate with you. When you read it again, it will make a little more sense. You won't be completely, like the emoji. Okay, I'm going to continue. So next comes, after Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, this is a point that does not appear to have been understood, so I have explained it here in some detail, and you can understand why he said it doesn't appear to be understood, because it seems quite complicated, right? Okay, so then in Fundamental Wisdom, Nagarjuna's main text, Mula Prajna, it says, the Blessed One who clearly knows entities and their absence has denied in the advice to Katyayana, both it exists and does not exist. So what is the advice to Katyayana? Katyayana, do you know, does anyone know Oh, let's see. Tal, do you know who Katyayana is? Or was? No, okay. You didn't. Okay. You're just gonna use it. Head mudra. Okay, no.
Sorry, my mic isn't working too well. No, I'm afraid I don't know.
You know, Don, do you know who Katyayana was? Some guy? Place? You don't know. Okay. Anyone know? Shankar, do you know who Katyayana was?
Yeah, I've heard it, but I can't remember now.
Okay, Paul knows.
I think he was one of the non-Buddhist teachers during the time of the Buddha, if I remember correctly.
Well, not this. There might have been.
No, there might have. Well, there was one. This might be someone else then.
This
Yeah.
Katyayana was one of the 10 disciples of the Buddha.
Oh.
So there are many lists. Remember, we've talked in the past the 8 great bodhisattvas. You know, there are 10 disciples of the Buddha that were considered to be sort of principal ones. I'll read a list here. Mahakashyapa, right? Ananda, Shariputra, Subhuti, Purna, Mahamoggallana. I'm not, usually we'd say Shariputra and Mahamoggallana first and Ananda at some different level. Anuruddha, Upali, and Rahula. So Mahakatyayana was is the 7th one in this list of the foremost disciples of the Buddha. He was, remember I mentioned in the past, Shariputra was said to be foremost in wisdom. Mahamoggallana was foremost in magical powers. Upali was foremost in discipline and so forth. Katyayana was foremost in understanding the brief descriptions that the Buddha gave, in advice and so forth. Let's see, does it say here? Yeah. So Katyayana, in Pali, he's known as Kachana, is foremost in expanding on and explaining brief statements of the Buddha. That was his specialty. So I don't know, amongst you, I'd say, Paul would be foremost in, Sanskrit, and Snehi would be foremost in this, Jennifer would be foremost in that, different qualities. He studied under his uncle Asita, and you may know that Asita, who is the minister who predicted that Prince Siddhartha would become either a Chakravartin or a Buddha. In the story of when Buddha was born and the baby, the king went to Asita, and Asita said, one of the principal ministers, old one, wise one, said that he would either become a Chakravartin king or a Buddha. So that's why the Buddha's father, the Buddha's father said that he wanted to prevent his son from seeing suffering so that he wouldn't become a Buddha, that he'd become, that his family lineage would continue as a Chakravartin emperor and everything. So Katyayana he studied under his uncle, Asita, who predicted that. According to the Sanskrit tradition, Mahakatyayana was the initiator of the Sthaivira Nikaya branch of mainstream Buddhist schools and a traditional compiler of the Abhidharma. So he's a very important disciple of the Buddha, okay? This Mahakatyayana. Maybe when it's given the epithet Maha that distinguishes him from the other Katyayana that Paul was thinking of. Okay. In addition to those, you may have heard, when you talk about Hinayana disciples of the Buddha, famous ones, there were also the 5 ascetics who accompanied Buddha during his years of meditation, that gave up on him and went off to Sarnath. And when the Buddha became enlightened, he sought them out to give the first teaching about emptiness. They also were associated with the people at the time that the Buddha was predicted. They were amongst the ministers that were present and gave advice to the king, the Buddha's father. But anyway, so Katyayana. So this verse in Fundamental Wisdom, the Blessed One who clearly knows entities in their absence has denied existence and non-existence in the text Advice to Katyayana. So the Advice to Katyayana is another Hinayana sutra. And also translated in the by Bhikkhu Bodhi in the Connected Discourses. There is called the Kachana Gota. Kachana Gota is another, or in Sanskrit, Katyayana Vavada, Advice to Katyayana. So I'm going to read you that sutra. It's very short. It's just like half this page. So it says, at Shravasti, or Savati in Pali, at Savati, which means Shravasti. Remember, my short-term memory is going here. The Ayodhya and Shravasti were very close to one another in Kosala, one of the kingdoms. Okay, so in Shravasti, then the Venerable Kachana Gota, that means Katyayana, approached the Bhagavan, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said to him, Venerable Sir, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? So you may notice sometime in the Vajrakutta Sutra, other sutras, sometimes things are mentioned twice like that. Do you have any idea why that's done? Oh, John's back. John.
Yeah.
Why?
I think for make it easier to memorize.
Maybe.
To make it easier to remember.
Maybe. But here, in another translation of this first line, it says, ask the Blessed One, ask the Bhagavan, perfect view is called perfect view. So sometimes it's talking about, conventional and ultimate. Anyway, let me continue. So Katyayana asks the Buddha, he says, it is said, right view, right view. In what way, Venerable Sir, is there right view? Okay, so the world, the Buddha replies, the world, Katyayana, for the most part, depends on a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. Remember here in this quotation, it says, in the Advice to Katyayana, both it exists and does not exist has been denied. Okay, so the Buddha said, the world, Katyayana, for the most part depends on a duality, upon the notion of existence and the notion of non-existence. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, sees the origin of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of non-existence in regard to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no notion of existence in regard to the world. So the Buddhist is denying existence and non-existence. What does that mean? I'll read a little bit further in a minute. What that means is that when you talk about existence and non-existence, like any other conventional terms, they don't ultimately exist. There's no ultimate existence. There's no ultimate non-existence. The Buddha continued, the world, Katyana, is for the most part shackled by engagement, clinging, and adherence. But this one, with right view, does not become engaged and cling, does not become engaged and cling through engagement and clinging, mental standpoint, adherence, underlying tendency. He does not take a stand about myself. He has no perplexity or doubt that what arises is only suffering arising. What ceases is only suffering ceasing. His knowledge about this is independent of others. It is in this way, Katyana, and I'm using the Sanskrit instead of Kachana, it is in this way, Katyana, that there is right view. All exists. Katyana, this is one extreme. All does not exist. This is the second extreme. So the Buddha is denying existence and non-existence. Without veering toward either one extreme, where is it? These lines are so close together. Without veering toward either these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dharma by the middle. With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations, the second link, right? As condition, consciousness. So he's talking about the 12 links. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, there is the cessation of consciousness, and so forth through the 12 links. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. So that's the entirety of this sutra called the Advice of Katyana. Okay, some background. Okay. Doris, was that put up? That was put up on the Facebook page?
No, I don't have that. So if you would send it to me, I would.
Okay, I thought that we talked about that before. Okay, I'll send that.
Not this one.
Okay, so we'll try to put that up on the Facebook page and then eventually on the Shantideva page for those who don't want to be on Facebook. So that's the context of this text. The Buddha was refuting existence and non-existence. What that means is there's no inherently existent existence. There's no inherently existent non-existence. So the Lama Tsongkhapa continues, this statement too indicates how rejection of the two extremes has been taught in Hinayana Sutras. And then Jimpa says, this sutra appears to be in the connected discourses. That's not what it says in the Tibetan. It actually says Duntansik, which is, as Jeffrey translates here, the brief scriptures on discipline, Vinaya Shutra Vastu. Jeffrey has it correct. Thus, Nagarjuna teaches that a refutation of the two extremes is set forth in a Hinayana Sutra, which appears in the brief scriptures on discipline, Jeffrey translates, which accords with the Tibetan. So either because this sutra does appear in the connected discourses, that thick book that Bhikkhu Bodhi translated, maybe that's what Thupten Jinpa was thinking. But what Lama Tsongkhapa is saying, it appears in the brief scriptures on discipline, maybe in addition to that. Maybe that's what Lama Tsongkhapa meant here. Okay, so these sources are only a few illustrative examples. There are, for example, numerous other lines in the Precious Garland, not cited here, and one also finds numerous such statements in Nagarjuna's 60 stanzas of reasoning and in his collection of praises or hymns, Chuma translates. Okay. What did John say? I missed all his notes. Okay. Okay, how are we doing? So we just finished one section here. Okay, getting close to the end of this exegesis, this excursion of Lama Tsongkhapa. Now, just one other section, rebutting objections raised against this presentation. Or as Jeffrey says, dispelling objections to the teaching that hearers and solitary realizers cognize the non-inherent existence of phenomena. Okay, that's what Lama Tsongkhapa has presented. So here's rejecting objections. This has two parts. Rebutting objections mentioned in the commentary and rejecting objections not mentioned in the commentary. So generally, when we talked about our earlier classes, talking about tenets and so forth, and mind and mental factors, usually in the Tibetan tradition, there would be, when some subject is presented, usually they're presented wrong views first. That is, the system of others. Then there's a rejection of those, logical rejection, and then presentation of our own system. Do you remember, Paul, what are those called in Dan Perdue's in his debate book?
It's Shenluk Gak, Rangluk Shak, Tsepa Bong. The Shenluk Gak, the refutation of the systems of others, Rangluk Shak, the positing of our own system, and Tsepa Bong, the dispelling of objections.
Right, I got the order wrong. So what do we say? What was the first one?
Refutation of the systems of others. Shenluk Gak. Shenluk Gak.
Gak Shak Pong Sum, we usually say in Tibetan.
Right.
Gak means a refutation of others. Shak means presenting our own, correct interpretation. And then Pong means once we've presented the right abandoning or getting rid of, rejecting the other people's, criticisms of our own. So that's essentially what's here, refuting the objections mentioned in the commentary. So here the commentary says, I'm getting close to the time here. Sorry, this is where we're going to end. Here the commentary. It's in the commentary. It says, some feel that if the selflessness of phenomena is taught in the Shravaka vehicle, there would be no point in teaching the great vehicle, the Mahayana. And if this, you, Chandrakirti, are saying that the Mahayana, Nagarjuna also saying that emptiness is taught in the Hinayana scriptures, then there's no sense to the Mahayana, because the Mahayana is teaching, the main purpose is teaching the emptiness, according to this person. This is talking about bhava viveka. Okay. Some feel that if the selflessness of phenomena is taught in the Shravaka vehicle, there would be no point teaching the great vehicle. I understand their standpoint to be contrary to reason and scripture as revealed below. So this is a statement of Chandrakirti in his Bhasha, his auto commentary to the verses, right? Here the opponent being critiqued is bhava viveka. For example, so you remember these personalities. Chandrakirti comes after both Buddhapalita and bhava viveka. Buddhapalita is sometimes credited as the founder of the Prasangika school. Sometimes some people credit Chandrakirti as being the founder of the Prasangika school of Madhyamaka. Certainly, Nagarjuna did explain these things, but he didn't sort of distinguish it from the other Madhyamaka schools, because the distinguishing of Svatantrika and Prasankika comes about because of this argument between Bhava Viveka and Buddhapalita. Buddhapalita and Bhava Viveka, more or less contemporaries. So here the opponent being critiqued is Bhava Viveka. He's being critiqued by Chandrakirti, who's, a generation later. For example, Buddhapalita's commentary, Buddhapalita was the sort of like we say founder of Prasankika in a sense. His commentary on fundamental wisdom explains the meaning of the statements in the Hinayana Sutras about all phenomena being devoid of self-existence in terms of their lack of existence through an essence. This is his commentary on the 7th chapter of Fundamental Wisdom. Bhava Viveka, contemporary of Buddhapalita, objects to this in his Lamp of Wisdom, the famous text by Bhava Viveka, right? Saying, if this is so, that the meaning of the statements in the Hinayana Sutras about being devoid of self-existence, that's what Buddhapalita is saying, the same as we're saying here. And Bhava Viveka is objecting to that, saying, if this is so, it would be pointless to teach the Mahayana. Because the implication meaning, because the special purpose of teaching, or the point of teaching the Mahayana, is to teach about emptiness. There's so many other things besides emptiness. One could ask Bhava Viveka, are you saying that that the Mahayana teaching in general would have no purpose? Or are you saying that the meaning of the selflessness of phenomena in the Mahayana, or the teaching of it in the Mahayana, would have no purpose? That's where we're going to end. That's where we're going to begin next time, okay? I'll make a note here. What page is this on in the written text?
98.
Literally the last line of it, 98.
98, last line, okay. So, and in Hopkins, it's on page, what?
172, I believe.
172, okay.
Start of a new section.
Right, 172. Okay, so that's where we're gonna talk about next time. So, how are we doing? Today was tough. Karen gave thumbs up. John, you missed. You have to listen to the first part on the recording. Any questions before we dedicate our efforts here, our merit? Donnie, no questions? You've been quiet today. Maybe she's off. Shanka, Stephen, Richard. Where's Mikhail? Mikhail is gone?
He didn't join today, I don't think. I haven't seen him.
Yeah, he was there at one point. Yeah, he must have had to leave. Rachel, you okay? Yeah. Tal? Okay, no questions. Okay, so go back from what we've talked about these subjects in detail, which Lama Khapa said, even other scholars didn't understand this well, so I've explained it so you can feel, okay, I didn't understand it well, so maybe I go back and read it again in the context of having heard a little more elaboration. Read ahead, and we will continue next week. Shanka, would you like to put up the dedication prayers? Due to this virtue, that's Gewadi, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all migrators without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme, precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And the long life prayers. Shankar, are you there?
Yes. Oh, sorry, I was too busy
There we go.
finishing the prayer. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, you're doing good. You're thinking, you're meditating. A long life prayer for Lama Sopa Rinpoche, you who uphold the Muni's moral code, serving as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, masterfully accomplishing magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then to all of our spiritual masters, the Dalai Lamas, the other teachers that we study with, Geshe Dakpa in San Francisco and so forth, you who are eyes for me to view all the infinite scriptures, the supreme gateway for the fortunate beings traveling to liberation, engaging with skillful means, moved by mercy, moved by love, all illuminating spiritual friends, please live a long and stable life.
Oh, stop.
So thank you very much. Gone over again. Hopefully you're not too annoyed. Look forward to seeing you again next week.